Welcome to the Michael Shermer Show. I'm your host, Michael Shermer. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to tell you about our sponsor, Wondrium, the former Great Courses. As you know, I have two great courses myself on Skepticism 101 and on conspiracies, and I wanted to tell you about their new program, which is called Wondrium. Wondrium is, it's a whole program online, and it's available on an app. I always use my phone as an example here. You just touch the magic W and up pops all the different programs, documentary series, and of course, lectures, courses and lectures. Like here's one that just popped up today, Mind-Blowing Science. So I touch Watch Now, and up pops all these lectures. Okay, so let's see how many lectures there are. 15 episodes of the series, including how dinosaurs grew so large and so small. Why are we the only intelligent life in the galaxy? Ooh, super cool topic. I love that one. Decoding the puzzle of human consciousness. Oh, just 30 minutes to answer that question. Oh, 20 minutes. Okay, good. The hard problem of consciousness. The first monster black holes, pets, why do we have them? The mysteries of Neanderthal art. 6 ways to boost brain power. In other words, a lot of cool stuff. Okay, so here's how the program works. If you access this through my podcast, you get a free month trial. That is a month free long access to all their content. Just tons of free stuff, programs, documentary series, various episodes of different shows, and of course, all these great courses with dozens of lectures on each of them. So you just go to wondrium.com/Shermer. That's WONDRIUM.com/Shermer, SHERMER, as I'm sure you know. Wondrium.com/Shermer gets you a free full month. Access it. And let me just add, we don't have a lot of advertisers on this program. I'm trying to get straight to the point of the subject of the guest's book or research and so on. And so the program is primarily supported by you, the listeners, both through donating to the Skeptic Society, but more importantly, going to these kinds of sites. I wouldn't recommend this if I didn't use it myself. I do. I listen to these courses all the time, these programs and episodes, and now documentary series. It's the only way, really, it's the best way to keep up as an autodidact. Keep learning. Never stop. It never stops. I'm 66. I feel like I've just begun my education. All right? So go for it. Wondrium.com/Shermer. Thanks for listening. Here's my guest. My guest today is John Mackey. His new book is Conscious Leadership. You all know who John Mackey is, the CEO and co-founder of Whole Foods Market and co-founder of the nonprofit Conscious Capitalism, Inc., and co-author of his book, Conscious Capitalism. He has devoted his life to selling natural and organic foods and building a better business model. Well, that doesn't even scratch the surface of his life, which is super interesting. Definitely a self-made person and a vegetarian, even a vegan, who also sells animal products in his stores. So we talk about the tension there between animal rights activists and business, what it takes to stay in business. And that leads us into talking about economics, capitalism, crony capitalism versus what he calls conscious capitalism, what it takes to build a company, and what happens to all the failures and why they fail, and the role of risk in building a business like this. And then we branch out from there. We talk about universal basic income and income inequality and many of the hot button current cultural issues like progressivism versus libertarianism, the problem of all these labels in general. And then we kind of branch off toward the end talking about some of the big issues of consciousness. He's a panpsychist and I'm a materialist, but he makes a pretty good argument for his position on that in terms of what is free will and consciousness and God and love and all that stuff, which is where we end it. It's a great conversation. I've known John a long time. I wanted to have him on not just to talk about his books, but also because I know from these conversations we've had at dinners that he's a deep, deep thinker who is widely read. He's read books I've read, and he knows all this stuff and comes at it from a very different perspective, which I really enjoy. So enjoy this conversation with John Mackey. John Mackey, nice to see you. Where are you?
I'm in my office in Austin, Texas, Whole Foods headquarters.
At Whole
Yeah,
Foods. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I see you're still listed as the CEO of Whole Foods, but everybody knows that you had a business deal with Amazon. They bought you out or whatever. How does that work?
I'm still the CEO of Whole Foods. Amazon's obviously a pretty huge. Whole Foods is pretty big. We're 21 billion in sales and 105,000 employees, and that's pretty small in the whole Amazon universe. But I'm still the CEO. I'm getting older. It's 43 years now, so I don't know how much longer I'll go on. But it's been 4 years since the merger, and Amazon's been a great partner for Whole Foods.
Yeah, all right. Well, we've known each other a number of years. There's a lot of things I'd love to talk to you about. You've heard a number of the podcast episodes here. So we're going to get to all this stuff, consciousness, free will. I know you're into all this stuff. You're widely read, smart guy. I want to get your opinion on that. But let's start with your books. I mean, I read Conscious Capitalism a few years ago when I was writing The Moral Arc. And then I just read the new book, Conscious Leadership, parts of it this morning. So here is how you describe conscious capitalism from The Moral Arc. Here, my summary of it. An ethical system based on value creation for all stakeholders, which include not just owners, but employees, customers, the community, the environment, and even competitors, activists, critics, unions, the media, and in the case of Whole Foods, the animal stakeholders who are part of the system no less than their human counterparts. That was my chapter on animal rights. And so here's how I describe the old narrative. You know, my thing about Darwin's dictum, all observation must be for or against some point of view, if it is to be of any service. So I think people write books against, just rebutting some other idea. Here's how I think of conscious capitalism as pushing back against the old narrative. Here's how I described it. Capitalists are a bunch of cigar chomping, money grubbing, profit seeking, quarterly report watching, you're fired growling, Gordon Gekko greed is good gloating, cold-hearted, ruthless, Machiavellian psychopaths. Is that not true? I mean, that's maybe the image from decades past, or at least that's the image some people have of capitalists.
That is a very common narrative. It's a narrative that has been perpetuated by the intellectual class. Not every intellectual, but many of the intellectuals tend to be anti-capitalist, and that's not new. If you read Deidre McCloskey's work, you see that business people have basically been disdained throughout all of history. Commerce has been seen as dirty and something that gentlemen wouldn't do, or that it's not seen as it hasn't been seen historically as good. And so the intellectual class still disdains commerce, and that stereotype that you just articulated is still commonly how business people are portrayed. If not quite that extreme, that's still at the core of it. And yes, I'm pushing back against that because I think business people create tremendous value in the world. That capitalism has been responsible for the great human enrichment that's occurred in the last 250 years. And it can't be understood. It's partly science, partly growing knowledge. But a lot of it is entrepreneurs taking those scientific ideas and creating and innovating and creating value for other people. And that's what business ultimately does, is create value for other people. And then through voluntary exchange, prosperity it happens and it spreads because the innovations make our lives better.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but what is it, in your opinion, in human psychology that leads to that kind of resentment of, I don't know what it is, money, just making money at all, or the profit motive? I mean, we do know a lot of anti-Semitism comes from, historically Jews migrating into these middleman positions because they were excluded from all other professions as, money grubbing, greedy people because they were taking a cut of their, managing money to help connect people with money and people without to grow businesses.
It's not just the Jews. It's also the Chinese in the East. The Jews and the Chinese have both been great merchants. Their particular cultures have been great merchant classes throughout history. Wherever the Chinese have gone in the East, they've risen to the economic top of those societies. In Thailand and Indonesia and Singapore, and pretty much wherever they migrated. Same thing with Jews. And if we're going to call it what it is, it's envy. And envy is a terrible emotion, and it's one that usually is in disguise. Envy is so ugly that people very seldom show it in its purest form. It cloaks itself behind righteous indignation. People are inequality, injustice, but at the root of many of those other type of emotions is actually envy, pretending to be something good and noble when it's really not good and noble. It's a terrible emotion, and until we master envy, our lives are not going to be nearly as happy and as fulfilled as they could be.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that in myself. I mean, sometimes I'll catch myself feeling like this episode of the show is brought to you by Brilliant. Brilliant is a website and an app that teaches you how to think and solve problems with fun, interactive lessons in STEM. You know STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math. It's all the rage. With Brilliant's hands-on approach, you'll learn by doing instead of just listening to lectures. Research in cognitive psychology, for example, shows that learning is greatly enhanced when learners are actively engaged in doing something with the material, rather than passively listening to a teacher. Thus, Brilliant has pioneered a better and more fun way to learn. All of Brilliant's courses have storytelling, code writing, interactive challenges, along with problems to solve. Brilliant offers many well-curated sequences of problems that help you master all sorts of technical subjects. For example, let's say you're interested in physics. You could try out their courses on classical mechanics, or if you're really brave, gravitational physics. Oh boy. And their hands-on interactive approach will help you master the material far faster and deeper than you would just watching some professor at a blackboard. Or if you like computers and coding, you can check out their courses on computer science fundamentals and programming with Python. Ooh. Also with hands-on interactive modules. So Brilliant has a vast array of courses that can help you achieve your goals in STEM, starting with one small commitment to learning and building up to long-term challenges and growth. To check out the many courses available and find out the one that's right for you, you can go to brilliant.org/Michael Shermer and sign up for free. Again, that's brilliant.org/Michael Shermer. And the first 200 people that go to this link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. Once again, that's brilliant.org/Michael Shermer. Thanks for listening to the show, and I encourage you to give Brilliant a try. Again, one last time, brilliant.org/Michael Shermer. However successful I might be, there's always somebody that sells more books or gets more talk invitations or has a bigger podcast audience or whatever. And I do catch myself thinking, damn, I know I'm as good as this guy. How come I'm not selling that many books or having that many people? And, then I have to kind of squelch that down.
Well, Michael, actually, yes, you should become more conscious. If you're conscious that you're being envious, you can transmute that into a more healthy emotion, which would be ambition, which is, I know I can do better. And I think that's a healthy response to the conscious, being become aware of the emotion of envy, because envy is an interpretation. You're comparing yourself to someone else and you see you're coming up lacking or less than. But envy is inherently an emotion of destruction. Envy wants to tear the other one down. It's an ambition is a healthier. It's like, I'm gonna surpass that. That's good. I've learned some things from them. Okay, good. They have a good podcast. What are they doing that makes it successful? You study what they're doing and you copy what's most appropriate, and then you put your own creativity in it. And a lot of innovation is driven by envy transmuted into ambition. I'll show them what I can do. That's healthy, in my opinion. But just envy, just trying to just take from others and destroy the value that others are creating, that's a particularly destructive emotion. And that's how envy usually manifests itself, by tearing down and destroying rather than trying to raise yourself up to a higher level.
Yeah, that seems to be behind at least some of the discussions about income inequality it just seems so unfair that some people make so much more. And the question I've always had is, where's the line? And, the example I use is my buddy Michael Coles,
Why is it
who made
unfair?
millions of dollars making.
There is no line. Why is it unfair that others make more than others? And some people,
Yeah.
It's not a zero-sum game. If they're not stealing the money and taking it by force, it's creating value. Somebody like Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, because Jeff's created more value for other people than anybody else. He hasn't stolen that money. It's been acquired through creating value and innovation, and then through voluntary exchange. Why does there have to be a line at all?
Well, I think, like, for example, at Whole Foods, you drew the line at 19 times the top salaries versus the average salaries. You got to draw the line somewhere.
No.
And that, I think that feels good compared to, say, let's say it was 100 times the average salary. Most people go, that just feels too much.
Well, Whole Foods did that primarily to create a greater sense of camaraderie amongst the team, more solidarity. It was a business strategy. It wasn't an ethical decision. It was a business strategy, and we've raised that up. It started at 8 times, then went to 10, then it went to 12, then it went to 15. It's gone to 19, and frankly, it needs to probably go up again, or we have trouble holding on to some of our senior executives. So, but we think about that with money, but is it fair that some people are more beautiful than others? Should we draw the line at a certain level of beauty, and then we'll deface people to make them less beautiful? Or somebody who's a better athlete, or is better basketball player, should we put extra weights on them so that they can't jump as high and run as fast and do as well? Why is it only in economic performance that we think we have to somehow or another limit what others create? We don't do that in it. If you have a musician, do we say, well, you can't publish any more songs? You're too successful in your music, so we're going to limit you to we're going to allow you to publish 3 new songs a year. Or actors, or anything. We allow people to be creative and innovate and create value for other people, and we don't talk about drawing a line and limiting it. Why are we doing it in business?
Yeah, that's a good question. Why?
Because of envy. And because you can use.
Well, but why isn't envy there in sports?
Well, you can use because we see that it's unjust and unfair to do it in sports, and you would never do it in business, except government has a monopoly on force, and it can force it. It can take the money. So that's the only reason we think about doing it there. We don't do it in other aspects of our lives. No other area am I aware that we try to limit people's ability to create value for other people, except in business.
Yeah, I wonder if some of that is because we can't see how the business is being conducted. I can see the difference between me and the guys ahead of me on the bike, and I just think, well, he's just better than me. That's just the way it goes. But I can't see why, how the Wall Street trader, he's just moving numbers around on a screen. I can't see how his value to the economy is better than mine. It just kind of feels unfair because I can't see what's going on.
But that's a good point. It's not intrinsically more valuable in terms of some kind of ethical code. It's not that he's more deserving in any cosmic sense of justice. That's not what we're talking about. It's just that a trader on Wall Street is creating value through their intermediation of they're seeing opportunities and they're jumping on those opportunities. It's not that they're intrinsically deserving of more dignity or wealth. It's just that, and you've used a pure case of financial manipulation. But if I was to go deeper into that, I could convince you, I think, that they're actually creating value too. But as you say, you don't see it. So why do you need to see it? Why is that important? Why is that the definition, or why we draw the limit? If you don't see it, therefore there's no value being created. It's being done freely. They're not, again, stealing that money from anybody. They're making markets more efficient because they're seeing opportunities and they're trading on them. And not all traders succeed. Many of them fail. Look at the average day trader fails at it because they're not good enough. So even in that In that sense, I think there's value being created, but it's not as clear as somebody like what Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett have done. They've obviously created great value for other people.
I think one of the things people don't see are the things that didn't happen, the failures that we don't account for. We don't even know who they are. I call that the biography effect. People wrote biographies of Steve Jobs after he died. Walter Isaacson's best-selling. So millions people are combing through those biographies to what's the secret. Well, you go to college, then you drop out, and you move back to your parents' house, and you start a company in the garage and with your buddies, and then you become a billionaire. Well, how many people in the 70s, dropped out of college, moved back to their parents' house and started a company, and they failed? We don't even know who they are.
That's exactly right. And there's a survivor bias effect there. Same thing happens. How many people move to Los Angeles because they're going to become stars? They're going to become actors. And they're working in restaurants and waiting tables, waiting to be discovered. And for every Harrison Ford who was a carpenter who gets discovered and becomes Han Solo and Indiana Jones and fabulously successful and wealthy, I promise you there's thousands of others who do not succeed. And that's pretty much true in any type of line of work where there's a great reward at the end because it's more competitive. There's tons of entrepreneurs trying to create things, and most of them fail. That's a simple reality. For the Jeff Bezoses and Bill Gates who succeed as entrepreneurs, or Larry Page and Sergey Brin at Google, I can name more. Again, there's thousands of others who try and they fail, and that's the way we make progress in our society because all the innovations aren't successful. All the value creation the market doesn't accept or want. Same thing in science. You've got a background in science, Michael, and you know that most of the scientists don't actually create new knowledge. They do a lot of tests and experiments, but how do they actually have breakthroughs? Very few actually fundamentally change the world through their scientific discoveries. For every Einstein, I promise you, there are lots of PhDs that never amount to much in terms of really creating value for other people.
Yeah, that's right. It's a winnowing effect, and so kind of walk us through how that works in business. You have a small company, you want to grow it. You don't have any money, you can't go to your parents or your buddies, and so you go to venture capital. And what do they want in return? You've opened your book, Conscious Leadership, with this story about flying to Florida to meet with your board of directors, and you were worried that they're going to can you. Well, you're the founder of Whole Foods. How could they get rid of you? How do they end up with that kind of control when you're the creator?
Well, the board's elected by they're elected by the shareholders, and the shareholders, when you're trying to grow, and if you're in Whole Foods, had to take in because I didn't have any money. I started the company when I was 24. I borrowed $10,000 for my stake of a $45,000 initial startup amount. And then over time, as we grew, we took in additional venture capital money. We went public. We took in money in the public markets. I gave stock away to nonprofits, to ex-girlfriends, to relatives. I got winnowed down. So I never really had control of Whole Foods. And but I had my piece of the pie got smaller, but the pie got so much bigger that I still became quite wealthy over time. But I did not control Whole Foods. So if the board could get rid of me, if the company wasn't succeeding, well, just because I co-founded it didn't give me a lock to be the CEO forever. And the board ultimately chose me, but in that particular story, but it could have gone the other way. And I would have had to do something else. I'd have started another business. In that case, I probably would have competed with Whole Foods because that was the business that I knew. It's not always fair in any kind of cosmic sense, but there's a rhyme and reason to it. The board was doing what they thought was best for the company, and that's their fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders.
Yeah. So again, back to conscious capitalism, it seems like there's a tension between these kind of long-term win-win goals, stakeholders. We want to be fair to our employees and customers and the environment and the local neighborhood and community. But isn't the board of directors' goal is to make money? Like we got to meet our quarterly demands. We got our third quarter report coming up. The stock analysts are going to be grilling us about why our stock share has fallen. John, your laudable goals for win-win conscious capitalism are in collision with our goals of making our third quarter profit.
They're not in collision at all. That's a false narrative that I will question. In fact, a business has to create value for all of its stakeholders that will ultimately fail. So yes, of course, it's the board's job. The shareholders hired them to look after their interests, to make sure that the management doesn't, mess up their investments, and they have a right to fire the management. That's a good thing. However, if you're not creating value for your customers, then you're not going to make money for the company. So you have to create value for the customers in order to make profits for the business. Profits are the result of creating value for customers. But how are you going to create value for customers if you're not creating value for your employees, for your team members at Whole Foods? Because they're the ones that help serve the customers and make the customers happy. And if you're not creating value for your suppliers, what are we going to sell in our stores? We have to get our food from somewhere else that we're going to sell to people. So we're trading with our suppliers in win-win-win partnerships to create value for each other. So in a sense, a business is an interdependent ecosystem of various stakeholders who are voluntarily exchanging with each other for mutual gain. And they all have to flourish ultimately as a class or classes, or the business will not succeed. You have to create value for shareholders, and if you don't, the board's going to fire the management, as they well should, or the board's going to be fired themselves and replaced by people who will. And think about it from another perspective. All the stakeholders matter, but the investors get paid last, Michael. Profits don't come at first. Profits come down the road after you create an organization that creates value for customers and other people. Profits will result from that. But then there's all these other interdependent stakeholders that are part of that, and you're creating value for all of them. But the reason why you have to have the investors ultimately in control of the business is, how do you keep the investors from getting screwed? If you take it over, say it was a customer co-op, a customer cooperative, and they said, we don't want you to make profits. As the food cooperative movement has long said, food for people, not for profit. Profit's bad. Well, if they don't make any money, then how are they going to be able to invest in new stores? How are they going to be able to grow? It's even in a consumer co-op, they need to make money or they don't have a future. How are they going to replace the equipment when it wears out? You're going to do that through your profits. So a business has to be careful that if it becomes too idealistic or too altruistic, if it stops creating value for the investors, it's not going to have a future, and the investors aren't going to like it. And they're going to demand that management focus on creating value for them too. They get paid last. After every other stakeholder gets paid, that's when the investors get paid. And to ensure that they don't get screwed, then they have to maintain a financial control of the business. That's a good thing. And by the way, any of the other stakeholders are free to start up their own businesses. Consumer co-ops are, they exist to create value for their customers, right? But they also have to make money or they're going to fail. You can create a workers' cooperative, same thing. They have to make money too, and they have to satisfy customers. It doesn't really matter who controls the business. They still have to make money. And if the investors are going to risk their capital, they have to make sure that the business isn't hijacked to favor one of the other stakeholder groups. And so when stakeholder philosophy gets misunderstood, when you talk about, well, we need the stakeholders the investors shouldn't be in charge. That's a misunderstanding, because management has to consciously create value for all the stakeholders, but it's important that the investors ultimately maintain control of the business so that they're not the ones that get screwed. And that was what will happen if the government takes over and says corporations have to be fulfilling all these other social justice or other social or environmental claims and whatnot. The business is no longer there to create value for all the stakeholders, including the investors. It'll lose its way. The genie will get stuffed back in the bottle that's created all this tremendous wealth and prosperity for the world in the last 250 years. Very dangerous path.
Yeah. It seems pretty obvious when you say it that way, John, but the fact that you had to write two books about this, and convince your fellow capitalist corporate people that this is the way to go means it wasn't like that. And so why is that?
Well, there's two different narratives that go in the opposite direction. One narrative is that business is just about maximizing profits. That's its goal, to maximize profits. And that narrative falls into the hands of the enemies of capitalists, because then you've got back to your stereotype of the cigar chomping, Gordon Gekko, greed is good stereotype that is going to that falls into the hand. Nobody wants a bunch of sociopaths running our business, and that are just about greed and selfishness. The Ayn Rand narrative, I think, is a narrative that she's misunderstood. Let me just say that out of the. But she also played into the hands of the anti-capitalists by making statements such as selfishness is a virtue, greed is good, and in a very narrow sense, those things get channeled for the greater good. But you're never going to convince people that selfishness is a virtue or that greed is good, because we don't intuitively think greed is good or selfishness is a virtue. And having an invisible hand that Adam Smith has is not going to change we're switching. You have two systems that are colliding here, Michael. You have a moral code that's colliding with an economic code, and that's why there's a lot of misunderstanding. In business, you're creating value for other people, and you're trading, and that's when they say, hey, it's not personal, it's business. That just means that if you're not producing products that I want to buy, it's not personal. I'm just going to go shop at another store that gives me better prices, better service, better quality. Or if somebody invents when Spotify came along, I stopped collecting CDs because Spotify was a better innovation for me personally. Tesla's a better automobile. I mean, innovations occur. That's how we make progress. And it's not personal. It's not a moral choice of whether to buy a CD or to subscribe to Spotify. It's just an economic choice I'm making. But we oftentimes then project onto the economic system moral codes about selfishness and greed. And that's when we start seeing envy start coming in. It's so unfair that these people have more money, as if there was a pie and they just went and chopped off a really big piece of the pie and left little for other people. We start putting a moral code onto what's an economic system that's basically just a value creation. I don't want to call it a machine because I reject that metaphor. It's much more of a complex ecosystem, and it's not really a moral code. There needs to be a moral code that surrounds it, obviously, to not cheat, lie, steal, and we have regulations and we have a government to ensure fair play. But I think oftentimes the confusion occurs because we start looking at it as, well, it's not ethically right that somebody has so much more than other people. And I questioned that. I said, well, why isn't it ethically right? Why is that ethically wrong? The assumption is that there is some fixed, limited pie and some greedy people are taking more than their fair share. But that's not the right metaphor. There's not this limited pie. There is this wealth-generating ecosystem that is creating more prosperity. And by almost every measurement, and people disagree with this, but by almost every measurement we can think of, the world is far better off today than it was 50 years ago. It was better 50 years ago than it was 100 years ago. It was better 100 years ago than it was 200 years ago. And it's going to be better 50 years from now than it is right today. In my lifetime, I have seen so much incredible progress. Yeah. I mean, if you just go back 200 years ago, that's not very long. That's a third of my life, 200 years ago. 94% of the people alive lived on less than $2 a day. And now that's down to under 12%. Actually, I think it's down under 9. It's like 9%. That's tremendous progress. Not to mention the things we can do today from the books that we can read. I mean, illiteracy rates, Michael, 200 years ago were at 88%. Only 12% of the whole world population could read. Life expectancy was 30. It's so much better today than it was by every rational measurement. But people don't think about it in historical context. They just see, well, that seems unfair to me that somebody has so much more. But that more has
Yeah.
come about by creating value for other people. So it's not a moral system that we're looking at. It's an economic system that the people that create more value get greater rewards. And that's the system that's led to all the progress that we're experiencing today in the world.
Yeah, in the mind of the market, I developed this evolutionary evonomics, I call it, this evolutionary foundation for why we have that kind of resentment of people that have more, in the sense that hunter-gatherer groups are relatively poor and egalitarian only because no one has much of anything. So no one can get too much more than anybody else because there just isn't anything. And when people did, even into, say, early modern period, Middle Ages, and so forth, there was a lot of shenanigans and cheating and rigging the system in favor of the elites and so on. So in a way, there's kind of a logic to distrusting people with power and money, because historically they often did get it unfairly. The capitalist system you're describing, say, since Adam Smith's time, that's pretty new, as you just said, compared to 10,000 years of human history, in which inequalities probably did reflect the system was highly unfair to the average person.
That's right. That's quite true. And the difference now is that we don't have to call it capitalism, which is for many people pejorative. But I like the way Deirdre McCloskey said it. She called it innovism. I prefer innovationism. It's a system where innovations are experimented, created, and if they work, they spread, and we make progress as a society. But innovationism needs investment, it needs capital, and you have to be in an economically free system in order to optimize over the long run, with some government regulations, obviously, to prevent excesses or to protect people. So there's the need for the limited state in my mind. But there's the narratives are both extreme here, Michael. So the first one is that it's all about maximizing shareholder value, greed is good, selfishness is a virtue. On the other side, the one that is our tribal heritage, where we evolved out of tribes that were more egalitarian, were smaller groups where you knew everybody and everything was shared equally because there wasn't that much to share. We were up against starvation, short lifespans, and illiteracy, and we didn't have all the cultural richness that we enjoy today. And so that's still there, and that's the real impetus behind socialism, communism, and the tribalism that we're experiencing today. Humans are not, we're still culturally sort of these beings that want to get into our group, kill the other group. This is my tribe, and the other tribes are dangerous and evil and exploit, and we need to make sure our tribe survives and wins. And we see that in sports, we see it in our cities, states, countries, race, gender. I mean, it's human beings have got to rise above that tribal heritage, and we have to do it in a more conscious way. And it's like, I think Milton Friedman once said, you kind of have to, this never goes away. Every generation is going to have to fight against socialism in a way, because when you're, the old saying is that when you're 21, if you're not a socialist, you don't have any heart. And if by the time you're 30, you still are, you don't have any brains. That's still there. And every generation has got to relearn it. The value of free markets, the value of human creativity and innovation, the dangers of tribalism. It's just, we have our own battles to fight today.
I'll give you a funny, trivial example. Since you mentioned Tesla, I have a Tesla. I'm on my second one. My second Tesla I got in 2018. The thing I like about it the most, because I live in Southern California, is I can get over in the left lane of the freeway, double-click the cruise control, and it takes over the steering wheel, and it maintains the distance of the car in front of me, and I can listen to audiobooks and podcasts, and it pretty much runs the show, and I feel really safe. Well, we just got a Ford Explorer too for my wife, and it does the same thing already. This is the 2020 versus the 2018 model. Ford is already doing this on their regular, just mid-price car. Nothing special about the Explorer. And now I see everybody's having electric cars that are self-driving and so on. Just in a matter of a couple of years, I love Tesla, but it's no longer, the best car on the road in that sense because everybody's
It's
adopting those
cultural
technologies.
appropriation.
Right.
Because of innovation,
Yeah.
Tesla.
But in this case, didn't Elon gave away his patents, right? Didn't he give away his patents on those
The reality
technologies?
in business is that the good ideas spread, and the successful innovations are copied. I saw this really with Whole Foods. I mean, we created a whole new category of sort of natural, organic, healthy food restaurants. I mean, not restaurants, grocery stores. And for a long time, we didn't really have any imitators. I say we flew beneath the radar. Nobody paid any attention to us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we grew and we became more successful, and people began to take notice, and they began to copy us. They started copying our products. They started showing up in other supermarkets. They started to copy a lot of our innovations in marketing, the way our stores look, and they began to undercut Whole Foods in price. So the reality is the best ideas spread and get copied, and you have to keep innovating, or you get passed up. And that's true for Tesla as well. Elon Musk is a phenomenon, and Tesla is a very innovative company. And one thing, I also own a Tesla, the Model 3, and I always say my car gets better pretty much every day or every week because they're downloading upgrades to my software that makes my car better. So my autopilot is a lot better today than it was a year ago. And it'll be better a year from now than it is right now. So innovation is how we make progress in the world. And it's important that it be appropriated by others so that they can make progress as well. So, yeah.
Well, so, and, there's this meme that, your company's called Whole Paycheck because you charge more. First of all, is that true? And second, if it is, do you have to charge more because you want to pay your employees more and take care of all the other stakeholders, the neighborhood and so on, and that just costs money?
I'll answer that in two ways. So there's always a market for higher quality, Michael, and your Tesla wasn't the cheapest car you could have bought, and you paid more to get your Tesla.
No.
But it's worth it to you, right? And you could easily say, well, people don't buy Tesla, it's too expensive. And it's no same thing is true in wine. The best wines are more expensive, the best clothing is more expensive. I'd argue the best food is more expensive. And Whole Foods is always our purpose is to sell the highest quality natural and organic foods available. So we always sought the local farmers. We always sought the highest quality, the freshest food that we could find, and that made it inherently a little bit more expensive. Well, that being said, as we got more competition and they began to put pressure on us by beginning to sell a lot of the same products at lower prices, the whole paycheck narrative became a little bit more true than it was when we were out there doing something no one else was doing. But, since I will tell you, since Amazon acquired Whole Foods 4 years ago, we've had 4 major price reductions. And we are a lot more competitively priced today than we were 4 years ago. So the whole paycheck narrative, people like to laugh at it. But if they actually went out and did a lot of price comparisons on exactly the same products, they'd see Whole Foods was quite competitive. So that narrative was truer. It wasn't true in the early days. It became true as we got more imitators. It's less true today as we've competitively responded to their competitive response to us. That's how you make progress in society. Competitors learn from each other, imitate each other, but then they also innovate to create more value in different ways.
But what's behind my question, though, is let's say, just take McDonald's. If you said, hey, you guys should pay your employees more, stakeholders, you should fix up the stores so they're more organic and nice to be in and so on. And they would say, yeah, that's good for you, but that's too expensive. We just can't afford it. So we have to pay our employees, whatever it is that's lower than minimum wage. And that's when the government comes in and says, hey, come on, you guys got to take care of your employees better than you are. And that's where you end up with intervention where, say, a minimum wage is enforced. Why isn't McDonald's doing what you do so that the government doesn't need to come in and say, treat your employees better.
Well, I'd say that's a little unfair to McDonald's. First of all, because they do pay better than the minimum wage. they're playing by the rules.
Okay, all right. I don't even know,
Yeah.
but just an example.
But I get the gist of what you're saying is that, look, there are different business strategies, and McDonald's is trying to sell fast food inexpensively. And in order to do that, they have to keep their costs down. So if they spend more money on capital equipment for their restaurants and they pay their employees more, that's going to make their food more expensive because their costs went up, then their prices have to go up. And if their prices go up, people are going to start to choose to shop in other places. So Whole Foods we've had an appeal to better educated, more affluent customers have been our target market. And we haven't appealed to everybody in America. Walmart does not appeal to everybody in America. There is no business that appeals to everyone. Businesses have to specialize. It's a complex ecosystem. So there are other hamburger chains that even spend less money than McDonald's does and undersells them in price. Just as if there are other, a Shake Shack is selling hamburgers more expensively than McDonald's does, and they're giving a higher quality product and higher quality service experience than what McDonald's might do for their customers. So in a complex ecosystem of business, there's all different kinds of niches that people can fill. And Whole Foods will never be as big as McDonald's because our niche is narrower. They're appealing to a much wider segment of the population than Whole Foods will ever appeal to. But hey, we're at $21 billion in sales. That's a pretty good sized business. So our niche is not as big as McDonald's, but it's a good niche, and it's been a very profitable niche for Whole Foods to service. So the people that attack Whole Foods frequently are just people that aren't our customers. Our niche doesn't appeal to them. They don't like our particular combination of quality, service, prices, and ambiance. And that's okay. But guess what? Millions of people do like the way Whole Foods does it. And so I'm always people criticize us, and it's like, why are you taking the time to if you don't like us, just don't shop there? I don't understand why you have to make an attack on our company and ridicule us. So just don't shop there if it's not your particular grocery store that you want to patronize. And that's generally the way I feel about most businesses.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I just don't shop there. I don't feel any reason to attack it and say it's, there's something wrong with it.
Yeah, let me come at it a slightly different way then, because the kind of the liberal narrative, maybe say the Bernie narrative that, there are single moms working 2-3 jobs. They never see their kids. They have to go to work at 4 a.m. because they're just paid so low an hourly wage that they can't make, a living as a full-time employee. And don't we as a rich society have an obligation that anybody that works full-time should be able to support themselves on one job, not 2 or 3 jobs?
I'm pausing because I'm conscious of the fact that whatever I say might end up a headline somewhere. If you look at the historical reality of humanity, people don't work nearly as hard today as they did 50 years ago, and that's simply we don't have as long of working hours. Benefits are much better than they used to be. The people the single moms that are taking 2 or 3 jobs, I'm sympathetic to that situation, but it's not that common. It's almost a straw man. The reality is very few people actually work for the minimum wage in the United States, the $7.25, because the average productivity rate has gone up far above that. And ultimately, wages are determined by competitive market processes. In reality, people are still trying to get over the United States to take our low-paying jobs because they're far better than the alternatives they find in their own countries. Wages are not an ethical, moral, again, we're trying to apply a moral system to an economic system and judge that economic system as immoral. It's the wrong metaphor. It's not a question. It's a question of what is that job worth in the marketplace? It's not a moral question of whether that woman deserves a better life. That's a different question. It's what is she producing through her work that's creating value for other people that the market's willing to pay. It's not an ethical question at all. And that's a difficult situation. There could be other potential solutions to it. But to try to browbeat business into saying you're evil or you're not a good because you're not paying a living wage, which I find the living wage argument to be an ever increasing one. No matter how much you pay, Whole Foods is we start people at $15 an hour with good benefits, and the average team member at Whole Foods is making over $20 an hour. But you can still say, gee whiz, who the hell can live on $40,000 a year? That's not a high enough wage. It should be at least 50. And if you paid 50, you could say it should be 60. It's always going to be higher. And I always say, when I have this discussion with people, I say, so you think we're not paying high enough if we start people at $15 an hour, that somehow or another that's morally wrong. And so that's not a living wage in your mind. And you somehow or another think it's a moral question. I say, well, then why doesn't the government just say the starting wage in America will be $1,000 an hour? Because guess what? If everybody was paid $1,000 an hour, Michael, everybody'd be wealthy. We'd have this incredibly wealthy society. It's just these greedy businesses that are keeping all the money for themselves. That's just not the way it works. That's a fantasy fairy tale. Because if you paid everybody $1,000 an hour, every price in the world would have to go up. If you try to get McDonald's to pay $20 an hour, then hamburgers are going to get a lot more expensive. You're not going to change economic rules, laws, and processes by waving a government regulation at it. The economic system will adjust to that, and everything will be a lot more expensive, and those people making $1,000 an hour will not be making enough money because everything else will cost them millions of dollars to purchase potentially. That's the simple reality. The wages are ultimately determined by competitive processes in the marketplace. It's not an ethical question. It's not a moral question. It's simply the way economies work. And when you interfere with that by the government saying that, well, we're going to have to pay a higher minimum wage, what ends up happening is businesses look for substitutions for labor. It's like, okay, well, if they're going to make us pay $25 an hour, we can buy a cash register or self-service cash register that we don't even need cashiers any longer because they're too expensive. We can't afford to pay them. Or we need to hire robots, or to hire robots, we need to do robots to stock the shelves. I mean, you begin to substitute capital for labor if labor becomes too expensive. It's well-intentioned. It sounds good. It plays well when you're making political speeches, but it's not an ethical question. It's about the way economies work, and it's about the way competitive process play out over time. And government can't change that by passing laws. You cannot repeal economic reality because you don't like the way the economic pie is it's not being divided up the way it's being shared through economic market processes. It's not just in any cosmic sense. It's just a system that creates prosperity for the most people over the greatest period of time, and we've proven that over the last 250 years. It's not perfect. We still need, if we need a government to get, I mean, we could explore some other conversation ways that if people feel like the system doesn't create enough wealth, the ways government might be able to help that and do the least amount of economic damage. But we see right now they're paying people basically not to work, and we're having trouble hiring people. There's not enough.
Yeah.
If you don't have to work, most people would choose not to, and that's faced with a lot of free money sloshing around. We have high unemployment rates, and yet companies like Whole Foods are out begging for people to work for us because they're hard to find right now.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a story in the news last night, not just Whole Foods, but dozens of major corporations are begging people to come work. So yeah, it's an interesting effect. Well, the problem you're talking about is on average over the long run versus anecdotes. So the Bernies of the world can always find somebody who is struggling along and hold them up as typical. Whereas your point is that, but in the long run, there's far fewer of those, and it'll never be zero. There'll always be somebody struggling.
That's right.
Much like the point about, we live in a far less racist society than ever, and yet you can always find anecdotes of, some white cop killing a black person, enough that it fills the evening news. There's always something there, and it feels anecdotally like things are worse, when in fact, you have to follow the trend lines, not the headlines.
That's exactly right. You just hit it perfectly said. And I'm old enough, Michael. I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I saw Jim Crow in effect when I was a little boy. Colored bathrooms, colored water fountains, and it made no sense to me back when I was a little boy. And I asked my dad about it, and he said, "John, that's a great evil that's going to be corrected soon," and it was corrected. And is there racism in America today? Well, of course there is. There's racism in every country in the world. But America is less racist today than it was 50 years ago. And it was less racist 50 years ago than it was 100 years ago. And I would argue, in fact, that probably every generation is a little bit less racist than the generation that came behind it. But we're probably always going to have some racism because people make judgments about other people that are different. I mean, people can get judged by their race, but they can get judged. And hey, when I was a kid, I had curly hair and wore glasses and was a pretty smart kid. I used to get pounded all the time. I got beat up because I had curly hair, because I wore glasses, because teachers liked me, because envy is very common with small children, and they don't hide it as well as adults do and pretend that it's something good instead of just beating up the kids that made better grades or the teachers liked better. So racism will always have with us, but if you have a historical context for it, we have less racism today than we used to have, and we will probably continue to make progress. And not to say that we should ever condone racism, but I don't think we should be hysterical about it today when actually it's far better today than it used to be. So it is puzzling to me.
When I was writing the moral arc, I was thinking about, well, what are the future moral issues in which, say, somebody a century from now will look back on us and go, oh my God, you guys were so bigoted and racist or whatever. What would that be? And of course, animal rights seems like a logical one. Now, you've been on the forefront of this revolution. You are a vegan, you do not eat animal products, and yet you sell them at your store. So I know the animal rights activists have been, they don't know if they should love you or hate you for this. And I know you've been called hypocritical for this. How do you balance that? You're since the 70s, you've been in the middle of this rights revolution that's unfolding. And yet, you're a business owner and you have to sell animal products. It's just the way it goes. How do you balance that?
It's a good question. And my usual answer to it is to tell the story that my very first store was called Saferway. Before Whole Foods, there was Saferway. Started in 1978. My girlfriend and I were both vegetarians. It was a vegetarian store. And it was actually a very pure store, too. We didn't sell coffee. We didn't sell sugar. We didn't sell alcohol, white flour. We were very, very righteous people.
Wow.
The idealistic young. And Saferway did almost no business. That was the reality, because the markets, it was too small of a niche. There just weren't enough vegetarians. There just weren't enough people that wanted to eat an extremely healthy diet. So we were failing, and we merged with another store that was like ours, and we created Whole Foods Market together, and we just said, we're going to sell, we don't have to eat them ourselves, but we're going to sell animal foods because that's what the market wants. You have to meet the market where you find it. And that horrifies people that I'd never even heard of a vegan back then, by the way. I didn't know any. Vegetarian was the ethically high position to take, so to speak. And it's easy to judge people. I always say, look, if you think you can do a better job, start your own vegan supermarket. It's a lot bigger market today than it used to be. But you might find it's still not a big enough market to There's some vegan restaurants out there, which I happen to eat eat those regularly, but they're not very many. It's still a very small niche in the marketplace, and I Whole Foods has been at the forefront of trying to improve animal welfare systems so that there's less animal suffering. I just recognize that it doesn't bother me because I live my own ethical life as I see fit. I don't try to make everybody live the ethical life that I believe. I don't try to coerce others, and I think people have to make these choices themselves. And that's the same way I see about eating animals. I don't eat them. I encourage people not to eat them, but I recognize the reality that most people are going to continue to eat animal foods. Whole Foods just does the best job we can to sell the highest animal welfare foods that we can find, and I don't lose any sleep over it. Others are more upset about it, but I just say, then go start a vegan supermarket company. Do it. You go do it. Tried it.
Yeah.
I couldn't. It didn't work.
Well, as you know, some of the most extreme animal rights activists would then say, well, you're like the southern people living next to the plantation owners saying, well, who am I to tell this guy he shouldn't own slaves? I don't own slaves. I mind my own business. He minds his own business. We wouldn't tolerate that today, but, say if you lived in 1850s America, you probably would have said that. So they say that about you now.
And they may be right.
And that in 100 years from now.
They may be right, Michael, because you started this out by saying, what are people going to be saying 100 years from now? And 100 years from now, they're going to be saying, this was horrible what we did to animals in the 20th and 21st century. Thank God we don't do that anymore. Actually, there's an innovation that are occurring right now that may make this whole question mute, and that is cell-based meat. And by the way, I've invested heavily into that personally, and Whole Foods has also invested in it, where there will be no more animal suffering because we'll grow these animal tissues in factories essentially, and it'll be bioidentical. You won't be able to tell the difference. It won't taste any different, but we won't have the animal death, the animal suffering, nor will we have the environmental negative impacts of so much land use going over to animals and the high degree of greenhouse gases that animal agriculture produces. But that's coming again from capitalism and innovation that's going to create the solution, not moral self-righteousness telling everybody that that this is just a wrong thing and no one should be allowed to do it. I'm sympathetic with that argument to a certain extent, and you can call me a hypocrite. People do. But I've made peace with it, and I do the best that I personally can. If I decided I wanted to make Whole Foods a vegan store, I'd just be removed as CEO. Somebody else would do it. And there wouldn't be the same emphasis on animal welfare that I've installed into the processes. So you use the slavery metaphor is a very powerful one. If you ask the question, I've studied that. I'm a history buff, which is why I always talk about this stuff in historical terms. And the fact of the matter is, if you go back, the people, even many of the abolitionists were horribly racist. Abraham Lincoln, if you see his history, he was a very strong racist. He was a conservative, meaning he didn't want slavery to go into any new territories or states, but he was perfectly willing to allow the South to have their slaves. That's why he got elected president instead of William Seward or Salmon Chase, who were more radical abolitionists than Lincoln was. That's just where the culture was at that time. So it's a good analogy. It's probably applicable. And we may look back with the same horror 100 years from now as we do look back on slavery today. I hope so.
Yeah, when I was researching that chapter on animal rights for the Moral Arc, I watched all those hidden camera factory farm videos and documentaries, and it's horrible.
It's horrible.
I can't even think about it.
But yet, Michael, you're not a vegan.
I know. I'm a bigger hypocrite than you.
You put the pressure on me. I put it on you. How do you justify that?
I don't justify it. I don't know. I'm waiting for the technology I will adopt. I'll be an early adopter. Like I bought a Tesla in 2015. I will buy the first, bio hamburgers that are grown in the lab. By the way, what is the status of that business? I mean, how much further do we have to go before you can buy a $10 hamburger made out of that kind of meat?
I don't think as far as people think. I'm an investor in
Yeah.
Upside Foods, which was previously called Memphis Meats. They changed their name recently.
Oh, yeah.
And
All right.
Uma Valenti is the CEO. He was a cardiologist before he became an entrepreneur, and
Right.
he is also a vegan.
Right.
He's a vegan, except he does eat his own product that he produces. And I'm not gonna. It's not my job to predict that, but I'd be surprised if a year from now that food is not available someplace commercially. It's got to get through a wall of regulations, and you have vested industry interests who don't want to see that product succeed, right? If you're in the Cattlemen's Association,
Right.
probably
Yeah.
you're not in favor of bio tissue cell-based meat being produced because it'd be a threat to your business. You'll probably try to use the government to keep competition out.
Well, okay, let's talk about that because that's crony capitalism.
Right.
So you are, to your credit, very critical of that. That's how the system works, right? They're going to lean on the government to overregulate these new technologies in order to preserve their profits.
They are, absolutely. And generally, innovators have to struggle against the entrenched, powerful business interests. Oftentimes, try to stop innovations from occurring, and they try to make. Well, a great example. It's very difficult to innovate in the pharmaceutical industry because it costs so much money and takes so long in order to get a new drug passed. It may take 10 years, and maybe I've heard up to $1 billion. So pharmaceutical innovations that don't promise to have big payoffs, they don't get invented anymore because the regulations are so high. That keeps new competitors out. So big pharma is in bed with the regulators because that way it's very difficult for new startups to come along, and they end up merging to get bigger and bigger. Right. I can promise you that Tesla's had to climb a lot of different regulation walls over the years themselves by the car manufacturers. Yeah. But that's why we need competition in order to produce new innovations, and we don't want government to stomp out those new innovations because a vested interest is trying to prevent them. And if we can think about it, it would be so good for animals and so good for the environment to have meat that is raised in a cellular-based way. It's manufactured rather than grown and slaughtered. It's possibly the most important innovation since agriculture itself was first created and first invented back in the 10,000, 12,000 years ago. That's what I think.
So just to be clear for people that don't follow this is a different technology than, say, the Impossible Burger, which is a plant-based, chemical-based burger that tastes like a burger, but it's not what you're talking about.
No, I'm talking about it is actually meat cells that are bioidentical. They're being grown in labs and eventually grown in factories that look like and taste just like chicken taste or beef taste. And if you did a blind taste test, you couldn't tell the difference. And someday that's going to be commercially sold, and that's not too far in the future. It'll start out more expensive, but over time, the experience curve and the manufacturing process will probably make it less expensive than regular animal foods. And when it becomes less expensive and you can't tell the difference, then it's going to completely transform animal agriculture across the world. And and there's no doubt in my mind it'll be completely different 25 years from now than it is right now. Completely different. And the world is a much better place off. That's capital.
Well, especially if that's capitalism, as long as the crony capitalists don't intervene. I remember when those almond milk companies were coming online and the milk industry tried to regulate them to stop them from calling it milk. You can't call it milk. And I forget how that played out, but now there's half a dozen options on my supermarket shelves for that, and that would be an example of your crony capitalists.
It's true. And I think the argument can go, it's like, well, that's not milk. But it's that we have cow's milk, we have goat's milk, we have sheep's milk. Why can't we have almond milk or soy milk or cashew milk? I mean, milk is not necessarily always only from cows, as we already see the other animals. Well, it has to be produced from animals. Why does it have to be produced from animals? Who says? It's arbitrary, but that battle was fought, and I think the dairy industry is losing that battle also with cheese, because now you have almond milk cheeses, and that some of them are getting better and better. The quality keeps getting better. The taste keeps getting better. The first ones that came out didn't taste very good. But some of the ones that come out now that they're producing are unbelievably good, these plant-based cheeses. Some of them are so good. Same thing with plant-based ice creams. I mean, honestly, it's been many years since I had regular ice cream, but I can't imagine the regular ice creams taste as good as the coconut milk ice creams I can eat today. The coconut milk ice creams taste better than any ice cream I can remember eating that came from cows. So progress, innovation, science, humanity moving forward. And you're right, crony capitalism is a danger. But crony capitalism is ultimately using the power of government to limit competition.
Right.
So one of the questions is
so this is why you're not a conservative. I mean, you're not a progressive or liberal in the economic sense, but you're also not an economic conservative. So let's pound on them for a little bit. You know, conservatives today are always say we're in favor of small government and minimum regulation and intervention into the marketplace. But that doesn't actually seem to be the case. They grow the government just as much as liberals do when they're in power.
But, you know, it depends upon, these are big categories to call somebody a progressive or a liberal or a conservative or a libertarian. And we know, because we both partly self-identify as libertarians, is we know there's 100 different kinds of libertarians, right? There's Ayn Randian libertarians, and there's Milton Friedman libertarians, and there's some that are really pro-science. There are others that are not. Some are more progressive people. There's lots of different variations, a lot of variants, and that's true for progressivism as well, and liberalism and conservatism. So you're right. Some conservatives believe in small government. Some conservatives believe in big government. Conservatives, the definition of conservative is more and more confusing to me all the time. As I might add, the definition of a progressive is more and more now we have a new form of progressive, the woke progressive. That's come into our language really in the last 2 or 3 years, right? I never heard of that before.
Yeah. No. Right.
By the way, I loved your podcast with Helen Pluckrose, and that inspired me to go read her book after that podcast. And she gets into it and does a really good job of explaining it. And she would say she's a progressive, but she's not this type of progressive, right? She's not a postmodern progressive. Right. She would say she believes in science and she believes in progress. She's more of what progressivism meant when it first came out, which might be what we think of what a liberal was. Now we have to call them classical liberals. So language is language is evolving too. Language mutates all the time, and so words mean different things from generation to generation.
Yeah, the labels are flattening for sure. I prefer not to use them, but we have to talk, and so you have to describe things a certain way. So probably the more labels we have on a continuum, the more helpful it is. All right, I want to hit you on some of the bigger questions here. UBI, universal basic income. You know, do we have a moral obligation, or even is it an economically sound idea? And so here I want to ask you about modern monetary theory, which is usually invoked at this point, that the government can just go ahead and print money. It's not like a business. It's not a corporation. It's a completely different entity. It as long as the economy grows, let's say 3 or 4% a year, you can print $1 trillion a year and just hand it out. And wouldn't that be either a morally good thing or an economically sound thing?
I don't want to tackle the ethics of it because that's much more controversial. I will maybe talk about it a little bit if you really want to, but economically, it's not sound. I mean, we're seeing it right now in a sense that if people are paid not to work, then People choose not to work. People are not working just for the pure fun and joy of it. And so the problem with the universal basic income is, I mean, I suppose if you took it from the if you put a universal basic income in, every political election from that point onward, it's like the living wage. It would never be enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's not enough. You can't live on just $30,000 a year of universal basic income. That's only $15 an hour. Who can live on that? We need to increase that. If I'm vote me in, I'm gonna put a $35,000 universal basic income in, or a 40, or a 50. Mm. Well, once it's in, it'll just grow and grow and grow, and it'll be very bad for the economy, the value of work, the necessity to work. There's not going to be just a few people that work and everybody else just lives on everybody else. The society would stagnate and we would begin to regress. That's what I think would happen. So I don't think it's economically sound. And universal basic income, that's a very different thing from taking the people who have disabilities, people who are not able for a variety of reasons to work, and having compassion and taking care of those people. That's a far different question than trying to take care of everyone with a universal basic income. So I guess I'm sympathetic to the idea of a safety net, that we should take care of our poorest, our people that are not able to take care of themselves. The idea of a safety net has always made sense to me, but that's what it should be, a safety net. And I don't think we should be growing that safety net to include more and more and more and more people. I'd say the same argument for healthcare. We should have healthcare for our people that are, I don't want to say the most in need, but the people who really can't provide for themselves. And so that I'm sympathetic to that idea. But creating a universal basic income or universal healthcare, I don't think those are good policy decisions. And I don't think, I'm not saying that the United States has a good healthcare system. The United States healthcare system is deeply broken, but there are other solutions to it than creating universal healthcare. There are other solutions that I would advocate for. I'd advocate for a radically different one that's more competitive. There's not transparency in pricing. Doctors have a monopoly. Mostly no one else can prescribe any drugs. Medical schools are hard and expensive, hard to get into and expensive to go through. We have a system that's quite rigged for the doctors and the medical device companies and the pharmaceutical companies. We don't really have competition in healthcare. Everything that would increase competition, I'm pretty much in favor for in healthcare. And that's what I would propose as a solution. It's not who pays for it. It's, we're going to get better healthcare. We need to have more innovation. We need to have more competition. We need more price transparency. That's really what I'm in favor of.
Are there any European models that you think work that we could pattern ourselves after?
That work better than ours? Yes. The United States does not have a good system. And I don't ever want to be in the situation of defending the United States system. And the systems that I like the best, the ones that they'll have overlap, I like Singapore's system a lot, which is, in the Singapore system, you have compulsive saving for your medical care, and then there's compulsive insurance. So that's the mandate, which we try to mandate. But in the same thing, and the other one I really like is a Switzerland system, which also has an individual mandate, and then they have a sliding scale, and they have competition between insurance systems or insurance policy. So it's not it's not a single payer system. It's a competitive system. It's probably what Obamacare could have been. It should have been more like Switzerland's system than what we ended up putting in. And it's sort of, we had just said, we're going to do the Swiss system. I think that's better than what America has today. It's still, I favor, I tend to be, I'm a capitalist. I'm an innovationist. I believe that we should be having a lot more competition in healthcare. But if if we feel like morally we have to provide for everyone, then I prefer, if the moral decision we're going to make as a society, then I favor a system close to Switzerland or Singapore. Those are my
Right.
two.
One of the practical arguments made for UBI is all the people that are going to be put out of work or are being put out of work by automation. So self-driving cars and trucks, for example, and taxi drivers and truck drivers, or at your own store, let's say it can all be automated pricing and self-service checkout, and you're no longer hiring checkout people. Or McDonald's now has iPads. I can order an iPad, so on. So what are those people going to do?
Oh, well, I always find that a very frustrating argument because, again, if you look at history, that's been said for hundreds of years now. I mean, the original Luddites were going in and tearing down the factories because what were they going to do? And the reality is that we continue to innovate and create new jobs all the time. And if you think about the new jobs that have been created, and just the whole gig economy is something that's new, that's 15 years old at the most, and they've created millions and millions of jobs that didn't exist before. Who'd have thought that you could be a gig worker for Uber or Lyft, or people could put their homes out for rent through Airbnb, or just their bedroom, or just a futon on the floor. So that's the reality is human needs and desires are infinite. We will never reach a state where if we allow innovation to continue to occur, we will continue to create new jobs. And yes, automation will come along, jobs will be eliminated, but then innovations occur in new ways we can't even imagine right now, Michael, that will create new jobs. We didn't need a lot of computer programmers 100 years ago. Nobody was, we didn't have any software engineers probably even, 75 years ago. So this old stuff is eliminated. We don't have telephone operators anymore, but I think we'd have to argue that our telephonic system with mobile phones and is far better than when we had millions of telephone operators pulling out wires and connecting them in together to connect calls, and it was so expensive. So change is inevitable, and there will be some jobs that are eliminated, but new jobs are created. That creates some economic insecurity for people. I can't deny that. Some people don't make the adjustment well. You get too old. It's hard to learn a new job. But we don't need a UBI any more today than we needed it 100 years ago. And in reality, we're going to create more jobs. I've already stated that right now, unemployment, it's hard to find workers because of just the temporary UBI that we.
Right.
So you can always say, I'm an optimist, Michael. I'm a technology optimist. I think you are too. But you can always project out disaster.
Yeah.
We're not going to have. We're not going to need lawyers anymore because AI is going to take all their jobs, and all those farmers and ranchers are going to be eliminated through this new meat that we're going to be growing in the lab for the cellular meats that are going to be produced, and so those jobs are going to be eliminated. But what people don't see is that capital that's saved is reinvested in new innovative ways, and new jobs are created that we can't even imagine. That's the dynamic nature of capitalism or innovationism. It's not perfect. There's disruptions, there are dislocations, there's real suffering that occurs. And if we're caring, compassionate people, we act in our own private way and citizens to try to help people. Maybe there's a role for government as well in those places, and certainly for nonprofit organizations to help those who are dislocated. We're never going to have utopia. We're never going to have a perfect system. We're just going to have progress. And we're never going to solve our problems because there are going to be new problems that come up that new generations will have to solve. It's called the human condition. Utopia is not one of the options, but progress is one of the real options. And we can continue to make progress if we don't destroy it, because we start saying the system's unjust and unfair, and we're going to prevent people from, because envy is going to prevent us from allowing other people to get rich, innovate, make progress, and we just shut it down because we're too scared of what the future might hold.
Yeah. Yeah, since you mentioned farms, it's good to remember 200 years ago, 90% of the workforce worked on farms, Now it's like less than 3%. Well, what did those people do? Well, they do other things now. Or
Well,
my other favorite example is the elevator operators, the little guy sitting in the corner of the elevator pushing the buttons. What did they do? Well, they're doing something else.
Michael, one of the best examples you used was the farms. And so one of the things that happened as we began to get our agricultural productivity higher is so many of the people left the farms and they went into the cities. And then you had your Dickensian era of what's human exploitation in the factories, and how horrible the capitalists were, the Industrial Revolution, and look at these working conditions they had. And those working conditions back in the 19th and earliest 20th centuries were far more horrible than they are today. But what's left out of that narrative is they don't know or don't remember or just didn't realize how bad the working conditions were on in those small farms, where people were working longer hours for less money or no money at all, just for subsistence, just to try to prevent starvation. And many of them didn't prevent it. Famine was quite regular. That was not a rare thing. So the conditions were terrible in the Industrial Revolution, but they arguably were superior to what came before the Industrial Revolution, which was starvation and people scratching out a subsistence living on small plots that they didn't often own, and there were just tenants that just barely stayed alive. The human condition historically has been a pretty horrible situation. It's just gotten a lot better. It's still far from being perfect, but we're making progress, and we will continue to make progress. Yeah. My hope and my dream.
Yeah, William Nordhaus made this point on the podcast a few weeks ago about the Kuznets curve for environmental economics. That is to say, for a poor country to become environmentally sound and sustainable, it has to go through its own industrial revolution. In other words, the environment's going to get a little bit worse for a while before it gets better, because it just takes money. And people don't care about the environment if they don't have 3 square meals a day and a roof over their heads to take care of their kids. Who cares about CO2 gases 1,000 years from now? So you kind of have to go through those stages before you get to this better.
That's absolutely correct, because you can see this happening out right now with carbon dioxide emissions, which is United States. We used to be the biggest carbon emitter in the world, and Europe was second, and now it's China by far. India second, U.S. third, Europe fourth, and that gap is widening every year. And because in some ways, when you're poor, you're willing to make an environmental trade-off in terms of pollution. We did in the West; they're doing it now in the East. And if carbon dioxide emissions is our problem for climate change, we're in trouble, because if the United States went to 0% emissions, and so did Europe, we'd still have a carbon emission problem. And that's going to be continuing, frankly, until we innovate our way out of it. And we will, just like we'll innovate out of the animal agriculture, we'll eventually innovate our way out of a fossil fuel economy. And I don't know what it'll be. It might be mini nuclear reactors potentially that are safer and produce a much more sustainable, zero carbon energy. Solar might contribute something to it, but solar and renewables are not the solution ultimately we can't build an industrial society on those 2 fuel sources alone. They're inadequate. They won't do the job. Yeah. They're not up to it.
Seems like nuclear is required, but environmentalists, they seem to have this attitude about nuclear that it's evil. You can't see it, smell it, taste it, and look at Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and Hiroshima, and this is a path we don't want to go down. How do you get around the psychology of nuclear power?
We're kind of back to that projecting a moral question onto an economic. It's really not a moral question, because moral question means it's good versus evil. So wind and solar are seen as good, and fossil fuels and nuclear are seen as evil. And they're not good and evil. They're different trade-offs that you make with each one of these sources of energy. And by the way, all of them have trade-offs, and solar and wind have serious trade-offs that are just the press and the media just doesn't want to talk about those trade-offs. It's not really a moral question. It's about how do we minimize negative environmental externalities while at the same time producing the energy that we need, that people want to have. Most people are not willing to go back to the 19th century living standards. They simply are not willing to do that. And they're not going to do it. The reality is we're not going to do it.
Right.
There's quite a bit of utopianism thinking in some of the environmentalists have a utopian mindset. And I don't agree with the eschatological doom catastrophe scenarios. I think human beings will adapt to changes in the environment, and I think we'll innovate our way out of this solution. So I'm more of a Stuart Brand kind of techno-optimist about and the importance of innovation and creation to solve these problems. I do think nuclear will be, one way or another, nuclear is going to be a big part of the solution, unless we can come up with a new type of energy source that we haven't imagined yet.
Fusion, maybe, but the problem with nuclear is that it's not allowed to fail. Stuart Brand, I think, makes this point about the amount of failure that the airline industry went through in the course of 75 years or so to get to the level of safety we have now. You can't do that with nuclear power plants.
I don't know. I think I agree with that, but nuclear power plants have been a heck of a lot safer than just about anything else we've ever done. I mean, Chernobyl is there will be some failures, and those failures is how humanity makes progress through failures. And so we're lucky and fortunate. We've had very few nuclear failures, and they haven't, with the exception of Chernobyl, none of them have been utter disasters. And but we have to get better at it. And but if your point is we're not going to allow nuclear to happen because we can't have a failure, we can't have any more Chernobyls, to be sure. But the nuclear reactors people building now have so many redundancies and safety points built in. But I think the solution is to innovate in such a way that we innovate past the nuclear waste problem. I think some of these mini nuclear reactors are beginning to solve for that problem. The spent nuclear fuel is not the same issue in some of these new technologies that it was 50, 75 years ago. We're continuing to make advancements if we'll just let it play out.
Yeah, it's good to remember no one died at 3 Mile Island. Fukushima, the problem there was not the nuclear plant so much as the tsunami and the walls and how the structure around it was designed. Even Chernobyl turned out not to be as catastrophic. It was bad, but not as catastrophic as was projected at the time.
Yes, and there are trade-offs with every fuel source. I mean, how are we going to have? I mean, do you know Robert Bryce? Have you read his work? He's an energy. He's written some great books. You ought to. He's got a documentary out also called Juice, and his latest book on electricity. He shows the trend lines, the development of the demand for electricity, Michael, is doubling. Like it's going to double in the next. It's growing at such a rapid rate. The demand for electricity is doubling about every 10 years or so. We're doubling the demand for electricity.
Yeah,
that can't be. We can't meet that demand worldwide with just renewable energy.
No.
We can't. I wish we could. We cannot do it. We're going to have to do it in other ways, and that's just reality, and we have to face up to it. And wishful thinking, magical thinking, utopian thinking doesn't solve these problems. And I feel increasingly that we're moving into this fantasy world of not seeing the world clearly, not seeing what's possible. A lot of and what I would say with as an entrepreneur, I'm always having to deal with what's possible. You have your ideals, but you have to put your ideals into the real world, and you make trade-offs as you do, and that's just kind of reality. Somebody's knocking at your door.
Yeah. It's my little boy. He wants to come in and play. That's all right. It's It's the byproduct of a home studio that we're all building these days. All right. One of the things I've always liked about you, John, is you're a big thinker. You think about the future, long term stuff. Let's just play this out. One of my favorite books on this was Trekonomics. Imagining an economy like Star Trek. The 23rd century. There's no money. There's just these replicating machines. Earl Grey, hot, and it produces what you need, and so on. There's no poverty. I mean, we're about to, according to the Gates Foundation and the UN, poverty will be ended as it's officially defined, $1.90 a day or less in the entire world by, I think, 2030, maybe 2035 now. So by 2100, that doesn't mean somebody that makes $2 a day is doing fine, but maybe say by 2100 or 2200, everybody makes the equivalent today of what would be, say, $100,000 a year or whatever. Could we get to that point, kind of projecting this out? And just how do you think about the long
You think they'll be drinking Earl Grey tea in 100 years?
I don't know.
So what happens here is, and it's common, we do what we project out sort of linearly. We take a trend and we project it out, and it can look disastrous when you do that. And we project out what we know. It's always interesting to read old science fiction because how were they going to get to the moon in Jules Verne days? They were going to shoot a giant cannon at the moon. That's
right.
That's how they were going to get to the moon. They were going to shoot it out of a giant cannon that went up a mile into the air because that's what they knew then. So, can we get to can humanity? We're going to have to develop our consciousness. The biggest challenge going forward is not just our technology, but collective consciousness, which is why I wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism, which is capitalism. It's just done in a more conscious way. I think humans are evolving. I think our consciousness is, your moral arc. We are evolving the moral arc. As you know, it's certain things that we condemned like slavery, which seemed to be common sense back then. We look back in utter and complete horror. And same thing we're doing it right now with a lot of wokeism in the sense that we look back and see any kind of racism or any kind of discrimination as fundamentally evil and wrong. And I agree it is. And by the way, discriminating against white people is also evil and wrong.
Of course, by definition. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think humans are making progress. And I think we're making progress not just in our technology, but we're making progress ethically. We're making progress spiritually, psychologically. We're psychologically healthier today generally than we were 50 years ago, 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I think that will continue. I don't see any reason, if we avoid nuclear war or some type of bioterrorism that escapes, that wipes us out. I think we're going to be. I hope I live 100 more years. I won't. I'd be really old. But I'm kind of hoping the singularity of that.
Yes, right.
I joke I'll spend all eternity at age 100. But I do think the future is bright for humanity in ways that we can't quite imagine. I do think we will solve the poverty problem. I do think we're solving it right now. I think it'll be solved in the lifetime of the young people today. There really won't be any poor people that aren't choosing to do that. And I don't think the UBI is the best way. I think there'll be other more creative ways where we'll combine money perhaps with work, supplement it in some way, earned income type programs. We need innovations in this area as well. And some of the universal basic income is an old idea. It's not particularly innovative.
Right.
It has lots of unintended negative consequences. We can do better than that. We'll come up with better solutions that help prevent people from suffering, that help end poverty, that are just more creative and more imaginative. I'll put that challenge to Michael Shermer. Perhaps you'll come up with some creative.
Well, maybe. I don't know. I've been thinking about that. If we go live on Mars, what kind of economic system are we going to have? What kind of political system are we going to have? You have a map of the world behind you there with all those lines drawn between lands based on rivers and whatever. Nation states. It seems like we could do better than nation states. the idea is only a couple centuries old. When I wrote the Moral Arc in 2015, it seemed like the city states and the power of mayors and power of cities where more and more people are moving. That's where the action was. But since 2015, we've gone, kind of sliding backwards toward nationalism and populism, especially economic nationalism.
It's a spiral.
Which is kind of an old mercantilist. Yeah.
It's a spiral. Spiral is the best metaphor. It's not a complete linear straight line up. You take 4 steps forward and 1.5 steps backwards. And it's not a continuous progress. And we have to regress. We go back and sometimes you have to fail at an experiment more. Hey, we've tried socialism 41 times in the last 100 years. It's failed 41 times. But people are determined. We just haven't done it right yet. This time we'll do it right. It takes a while and each generation sometimes needs to learn things anew. It's young people don't always want to listen to older people because they don't understand. So lots of old experiments get run again. The commune movement has a long history in the United States. But then when I was a youth, we started our own communes. I lived in a commune for a while. So
you did?
Yeah, sure. Not very long, a couple of years. But you know what? These same issues come up. You're going to share everything equally. Well, I don't like that. I want to have some things that others don't have. But that's another conversation. Maybe we can have that when we're in Freedom Fest together. Is there anything you want to ask me about free will or anything? Because I'm going to actually have to run pretty soon.
Oh, yeah. No, I want to just hit the last couple big questions on consciousness. Because I think you and I disagree about that a little bit. I mean, you're into meditation, Are you a panpsychist and how do you explain the hard problem of consciousness? How do you get thought out of just neurons swapping chemicals?
I don't think consciousness is restricted to the brain. I think consciousness is
okay. Where is it?
Consciousness is everything, everywhere. I'm an idealist in the Berkeley sense. I believe the consciousness that I believe there's only the one, Michael. There's only the one.
The one.
There's only the one. We're all manifestations of the one. Everything is a manifestation of the one. It's eternal play, and you can call that what you want. You can call it God. You can call it spirit. You can call it. I just call it the one. There's only the one. You're a manifestation. I'm a manifestation. We all are. It's eternal. It's eternal play, and we've done it. We've been around forever and ever and ever. We always will be. And consciousness predates everything.
So if I ask where is it, that's the wrong question because it's everywhere. There's nowhere to find it.
If you ask a fish where water is, the fish couldn't answer that. Water is their reality. Yeah. Consciousness is our reality. Yeah. Consciousness, and honestly, I say this from my own experiments and in altering my consciousness in deep ways. So that's where that.
But then what is your response to the counter that if you take away a part of the brain, the fusiform gyrus and the temporal lobe, facial recognition goes away, you no longer have that function when the structure is gone? Doesn't that mean the brain is creating those experiences?
I would switch the metaphor around. It's like there's a radio receiver and there are all these songs are out there. And there's all kinds of radio waves, but if you shut down the receiver, you can't get it anymore. The brain isn't merely the brain is creating a big part of your experience, but that experience is not limited to the brain. The reality is, I'm more of an Aldous Huxley. When Huxley talked in The Doors of Perception, that actually our brains they keep out information as much as they let information in. When you remove the doors of perception, you see that, my God, there's so much more information, so much more consciousness out there than I ever realized, because my brain is just too small to receive anything more than it does. It's there to keep us alive and to survive. So this is not something I can persuade someone simply through words. Yeah. It's about experiences that I've had.
It's an
experience. It's a knowing that I have that I can't prove. I can say that if you did the similar experiences, you would reach similar conclusions, I think. But
Interesting.
you'd have to have
That's an interesting question of epistemology.
you'd have to have your ego dissolve to see that you're not your brain, you're not your ego, you're not your body, that you are more than that. And that's just
Can you do that through meditation alone, or do you need?
There's a simple,
or do you need like ayahuasca or something?
Those definitely open the doors of perception wider. LSD, ayahuasca, psilocybin, things like that. But there's simple things you can do. You can begin to experience a deeper consciousness just through simple holotropic breath work, which doesn't involve any psychoactive substances at all. Just by regularly deep breathing in a controlled fashion. I've done it many times. I've gone into deep altered states and experienced higher states of consciousness. So meditation is another way to do it. These are shortcuts if you use a psychedelic. That's a shortcut. So you don't have to, but if you do, if you take a strong enough dose, you have an experience of dissolving of your ego death. And then you're in the one, and there's only the one, and you're immortal, and there's nothing to be afraid of. But I can't persuade a materialist or the head of Skeptic magazine. I can only say that's been my experience. That's what I believe, and I don't have any reason to try to persuade you of it anyway. You can believe what you want to believe.
Yeah. So after the body of John Mackey dissolves, where is your self, or is there a self?
There is no self. There's only the one.
So you just return to the current pattern of information that represents you, your DNA, your thoughts, your connectome, and so on. This package inside your skull and body, that's gone. Where does that information go?
It doesn't leave. It doesn't go anywhere. It's. Here's a metaphor I like. Michael said, right now you're wearing some clothes, and you're going to take those off tonight, and you're not going to mourn the passing of your clothes because you could put them on later if you wanted to, right? And you're going to put some other clothes on tomorrow, and that's just going to be what you're wearing for the day. And our egos, our minds, our bodies, that's just what we're wearing right now. That's not who we are. We are not that. We are far more than that. And we'll have this conversation some other time. And different.
You mean in another universe or another cosmos or another conscious state?
Exactly. I suspect we've had this conversation before anyway.
Oh my God. Past lives. Oh boy, John. You are out there. I love that.
You put those clothes on before. Oh my God, you're wearing the same clothes. I saw you wearing that same shirt some other time. I mean, it's just a matter of just.
That's too funny.
Again, this sounds crazy to people that it doesn't. It sounds insane to people that haven't had similar experiences. I can't prove it. I can only point the way.
I understand. So for an atheist like me to say, well, where is God outside of space and time? How does he interact with the physical substance of our universe and so on? These, in your worldview, would be the wrong kinds of questions. Yeah. There's still kind of a materialistic way of thinking about it.
There's no separation. That very question assumes God is outside and that there's something that's not God.
Yeah.
And God, anyway, is a loaded word. People project all these different things on it. I don't like to use that word because, it's people get upset. An atheist starts screaming at you, or somebody who's has a different definition of God gets upset. So I prefer to say there's the one, and we're all expressions of the one. And and life's amazing. It's a gift to be alive. It's very special, and there's really nothing to be worried or afraid about. You'll see. It's just at the end of the day, it's just really about love, Michael. Love is the meaning of life.
Okay.
And love is what is behind everything else.